hey, I'm a diagnosed narcissist, and there's a question that I've been wondering about because, with the stigma in terms of being a narcissist, I mean, in layman's terms, they don't even really talk about narcissistic personality disorder per se. The word narcissist or just narcissism in everyday use is just everything associated with what somebody doesn't like in a human. Oh, I don't like this person. They piss me off. They must be a narcissist, blah, blah, blah. So I think this has contributed to a lot of the talking points in terms of how borderlines are viewed in a more sympathetic light than narcissists. But I'm here to actually challenge that a little bit. I'm not trying to add more stigma to people with like BPD. I mean, I know that if you're in the cluster B category, we just have to deal with, stigmatization every single day from people that just don't get it. But I mean, I do notice the complete disparity in terms of, oh, why would people be more inclined to attack narcissists or even, let's say, people with ASPD, sociopaths, rather than maybe somebody with borderline or like histrionic personality disorder? And honestly, I think a lot of this has to do with the kind of people that are typically diagnosed with these disorders. Like within ASPD and NPD, you typically see more men being diagnosed with such, and with HPD and BPD, they typically have more females in that category. Now, a lot of this can easily be attributed to the fact that society does have a bias to favor women as more empathetic and caring more oftentimes than men. Like when okay, this is not going to be a video about like men's issues or anything like that, but I'll just use them as like simple examples. Like when it comes to custody, the courts are more likely to favor women taking care of children. Or let's say in terms of committing crimes, for more or less the same crime, men will typically get harsher, more severe penalties than a woman would. So these are just examples that make out as to why society might hypothetically favor women more than men. And in regards to BPD, in relation to like NPD especially, I know the stigma that a lot of like women, or let me just say people in general, but let's just talk about like BPD in this case, might go through being seen as, I guess, like the crazy ex or something, or people that do like wild and insane like crazy things. And I'm sure when you guys talk about the stigma in terms of like BPD, you'll go out of your way to, dispute that in terms of, oh, we can manage ourselves, whatever, this or that. Like I'm sure there's a whole lot of that happening. But the funny thing is though, is that when comparing BPD and NPD, some people, I don't want to say all, but some people will use those exact same things that they're trying to fight the stigma for BPD for as an upper hand thing towards people with narcissistic personality disorder. Because with the cliche interpretation of narcissism and even just the whole like layman's interpretation of, oh, narcissism being associated with every single thing that you wouldn't like in a person, it's easy to go off with the BPD narrative that, oh, people with BPD actually care about who they love, blah, 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 yada, 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 this or that. And I'm not saying that you guys are incapable of like genuine, actual love, but I will bring up the fact that we're in the same cluster B category for a reason. Because every single one of these disorders, of course, they come across in different ways, and that's why we have different, like different diagnoses to begin with. But let's not forget what all of us have in common: a complete, you know, sense of emptiness and lack of personhood within. So it kind of makes me like, I guess, just like laugh a little bit because if you are in some sort of episode as somebody with BPD, are you really as empathetic or sympathetic as you want to believe yourself to be? At least when you're directly using these things in attack towards, narcissists? Because why is it that people with BPD freak out when they don't have their, favorite person, quote unquote? Because people with borderline personality disorder have learned to use other people as a way to emotionally, self regulate themselves. because that's the problem that cluster Bs have in general. We have terrible emotional regulation. So, for example, as a narcissist, I tend to compensate my emptiness and, feelings of like not having anything there with superiority. What people with borderline will do is latch on to a favorite person and feel like somebody when they're around other people. So on the surface, that may look more compassionate, more sympathetic than what narcissists tend to do, because I admitted myself, or at least just like for me personally, as a narcissist, and I'm not going to be surprised if it's a lot of narcissists actually, we have avoidant attachment styles, and we typically want to go away from things that are, difficult. If you watch my video about why narcissists and borderlines are attracted to each other, one of the big things that I've said is that, and I still hate admitting this, is that borderlines are typically the only people that can manipulate a narcissist back in terms of, when we want to walk away because, oh, healthy people, right, won't put up with narcissists. They won't put up with our, I don't know, need for like superiority and being on top or like whatever. But borderlines are the ones willing to compensate for that and make us feel like the greatest thing. They know exactly what it is that lures us back. And it does something for them as well. Because I've noticed, and from my observation with borderlines, the more they can idealize and, hype up their favorite person, the greater they're going to be in that person's, like space, because it gives them that sense of security. They don't know who they are unless they're like, loving somebody, quote unquote. I don't really know who I am unless I feel superior. If I don't feel superior and I split, I just feel, like I'm the worst, because it's very like black and white. The issue with a lot of these cluster B personality disorders is the, all or nothing thinking. So in regards to borderlines being like way more empathetic than like narcissists, I think I can see why people fall for that on like a superficial level, but at least it kind of begs the question though, that do you really care about this person if you're only using them for your own emotional regulation? Because borderlines, you relate with narcissists, and I guess like the whole cluster B bunch in general, when you talk about your own emptiness or not really knowing who you are, or needing to love hard in order to feel securely attached to somebody, because you try to compensate your lack of identity with an identity of being the most loving person towards whoever you're in a relationship with. So I feel like if we were to like tap in it like psychologically, and I'm not saying I don't entirely understand where you're coming from in terms of like the compensation and whatnot, but like in a way, this is why I think that like narcissists and borderlines are like more similar than they'd like to, you know, admit to themselves, admit to ourselves, I guess. So people are going to hear narcissistic supply and think that that sounds pretty distasteful. But when people hear favorite person in the context of people with BPD, on the surface, that doesn't sound as, like, let's say, grating as narcissistic supply would. On the surface, it sounds way more easy to, take in. But if we were to truly break both of them down, they stem from the same thing. They stem from a lack of being able to emotionally regulate one's self. So if I'm talking about narcissistic supply, if there is somebody hyping me up and making me feel really good about myself, I like them for that reason. Admittedly, yes, they are supply, because the more that they inflate my ego, the less I have to possibly deal with wondering if I'm truly just inferior, like, below sort of human being. But I always imagined it for like people with like BPD, that in order for them to deal with themselves, they need to know that somebody out there thinks that like they're worth it. So in a way, you can really sort of see how a lot of these, cluster B disorders can like blend together. And I've even seen people say they both have NPD and BPD. And the more I think about it, it's kind of starting to make more sense, because in a lot of ways, what people with BPD do, and this is not to like contribute to like, the stigma, but I would say a lot of you shouldn't deny or wouldn't be able to deny that a lot of the things that might motivate your behavior is no different from a narcissist's own need for self regulation. Oh, and one thing I've noticed about narcissists and borderlines is that we both crave intimacy, yet are simultaneously repulsed by it. Like, as a narcissist myself, I want to be admired by the people that I surround myself with, if ever. And that's why I guess it would be called narcissistic supply. For a borderline, you want the validation of somebody that you consider your favorite person. But it always irritates me to be around other people because despite the fact that, for example, I would enjoy being like, buttered up, just to think that I would need anyone's validation already is super gross and really disgusting to me. And both of those feelings, despite how contradictory they are, make a lot of sense. And when I look over at borderlines, what you guys have the inclination of doing is essentially just upping the ante. Like, when you get the validation from your favorite person, you might be susceptible to still do things like, do loyalty tests, ask ask the whole, "Oh, do you really love me?" accusations of cheating, the need for your favorite person to constantly, prove themselves to you because the, you know, validation is just never enough. And simultaneously, for a narcissist as well, I can be praised and praised and praised, and despite how much I want it, it never feels like it's enough because we're just truly empty and just, you know, dealing with just the blandness, I guess. I don't know how else to say it. So when I see narcissists like myself, I kind of just think that we're hyper independent borderlines. When I see borderlines, I kind of just think that they're codependent narcissists. And if you don't know what I mean, try to keep that in mind the next time you notice yourself splitting.